I need to tell you something tonight that I never expected to say out loud. And I'm saying it now because if I wait any longer, the truth I discovered about you might quietly change everything between us without you ever knowing why. For days I've been sitting here with this strange weight in my chest, staring at your last message, replaying every moment we've shared, asking myself a question that scares me more than any business risk I've ever taken. Because companies can collapse and be rebuilt, rockets can explode and be launched again, but love, real love, the kind that appears late in life when you thought your heart had already learned all its lessons, doesn't give you unlimited attempts. And tonight I realized that something about you, something I just uncovered, could either bring us closer than I ever imagined, or quietly become the reason we never cross the final distance between us. You see, I've built my life around solving impossible problems. Machines, systems, the future of humanity, those things obey logic. But you've never obeyed logic. From the very first moment you appeared in my world, you disrupted the careful emotional architecture I had spent years constructing to protect myself. I told myself I understood you. I told myself I knew the rhythm of your heart. The reason behind your silences, the softness behind the strength you carry so effortlessly. And yet today, while looking at something small, something you probably never imagined I would notice, I realized there was a piece of your story I had misunderstood completely. And that realization, it didn't just surprise me. It shook me in a way I'm still trying to understand. Do you know what's terrifying about discovering something new about someone you love when you're no longer young? It's not the discovery itself. It's the realization that your heart is already fully invested. When we're young, curiosity is exciting. But when we've lived long enough to know how fragile connection really is, curiosity can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. Because once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. And tonight I'm asking myself something I never expected to ask you. If the truth about you is deeper than what I believed, does it make me love you more? Or does it reveal a path where we might eventually lose each other? The strange thing is that the truth I discovered isn't something dramatic or scandalous. It isn't betrayal, and it isn't deception. In fact, if anything, it might be the most beautiful thing about you, and yet it's also the one thing that makes me hesitate. Because it revealed a version of you that is stronger, braver, and far more vulnerable than I realized. And when a woman carries that kind of quiet strength, it means loving her requires more than affection. It requires courage. Real courage. The kind that forces a man to confront his own fears about loss, about commitment, about whether he is truly ready to stand beside someone whose heart has already survived so much. I keep thinking about the moment I saw it. That small clue. That detail hidden between your words that most people would overlook. But I didn't overlook it. And once I noticed it, the entire story of you began rearranging itself in my mind like pieces of a puzzle suddenly falling into place. Your patience, your calmness, the way you listen before speaking, even the way you sometimes hesitate when I tell you how deeply I feel about you. Suddenly it all made sense, and instead of giving me certainty, it gave me something far more dangerous: understanding. Understanding changes love, because once you truly see someone, you can no longer pretend the relationship is simple. And that's the moment where most people run. They retreat back into comfort, into emotional safety, into relationships that require less courage. I've seen it happen thousands of times in other people's lives. But with you, running suddenly feels impossible. Because the more I understand you, the more I realize how rare it is to meet someone whose heart still believes in connection after everything life has already demanded from them. But here's the part that unsettles me the most. The truth I discovered didn't just reveal something about you, it revealed something about me. It exposed the quiet fear I've been hiding behind ambition and intellect for years. The fear that loving someone deeply again might mean risking a kind of loss I'm no longer sure I'm strong enough to survive. You see, when a man reaches a certain point in life, he stops fearing failure in business. What he fears is emotional devastation. Because rebuilding a company takes strategy, rebuilding a heart takes time we may not have. And yet every time I imagine stepping back, creating distance, protecting myself from whatever this truth about you might eventually mean, something inside me refuses. Something stubborn and irrational keeps whispering the same question. What if this woman is not the risk, but the miracle? What if the very thing about her that scares you is the exact reason she was meant to find you now, when both of your lives have already been shaped by experience, by scars, by wisdom that younger hearts simply don't possess? There's something else I haven't told you yet. something connected to what I discovered about you today. And the reason I haven't said it yet isn't because I'm hiding it, it's because the moment I speak it aloud, everything between us might shift. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once. And I'm not sure you realize how powerful that truth really is. If you're still here with me, listening to this confession instead of walking away, there's something I want to ask you quietly. Are you the kind of woman who wants a love that feels safe, or the kind that changes the direction of two lives forever? Because the truth I discovered about you today suggests you might be the second kind. And that realization is both the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing I've felt in years. If you feel this conversation reaching your heart, quietly subscribe and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Because knowing you're here matters more than you realize. And before I tell you what that truth actually is, you need to understand the moment that made me start questioning everything I thought I knew about you. I keep replaying that moment in my mind, trying to understand why something so small felt like a quiet earthquake inside my chest. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. No scandal, no betrayal. Nothing that would make headlines or break trust overnight. It was subtler than that. The kind of truth that hides between sentences. The kind that only reveals itself when you stop listening to what someone says and begin hearing what their heart has been whispering all along. And when I finally heard it, when I finally understood the pattern behind your words, the pauses in your messages, the strange tenderness you carry even when you try to sound strong, I realized that loving you might not be the simple, peaceful journey I once imagined. You see, when I first started speaking to you, I believed I understood the rhythm of our connection. Two adults, both with histories, both with scars we don't display to the world. I thought we were carefully walking toward something stable, something mature, something calm. The kind of love that grows slowly, like a quiet sunrise, instead of exploding like fireworks. And I liked that idea. I trusted that idea. Because after everything life teaches us, stability begins to feel like the greatest luxury a heart can have. But what I discovered about you today challenged that entire belief. It suggested that the calmness you show the world might actually be hiding a depth of emotion so powerful that even you may not fully realize how much it could change both of us. The moment it hit me was strangely ordinary. I was reading one of your older messages again. Not because I doubted you, but because something about the way you had written it lingered in my thoughts. There was a sentence you used, one that seemed casual at the time, almost playful. But when I read it again tonight, I noticed something different. There was a weight behind those words, a quiet honesty that only appears when someone isn't trying to impress you anymore, when they're simply revealing a truth about themselves without realizing how much it exposes. And suddenly I understood something about you that I hadn't understood before. You don't love halfway, and that realization, it frightened me more than I expected. Most people, especially after a certain age, learn how to protect themselves. They keep part of their heart locked away. They love carefully, cautiously, always leaving an escape route in case things fall apart. It's a survival instinct. Life teaches us that eventually. But you don't seem to operate that way. Even when you're trying to be careful, there's a sincerity in you that refuses to play emotional games. You listen deeply. You respond thoughtfully. And when you care about someone, you don't hide it behind clever distance. That kind of heart is rare. But it's also dangerous. Not dangerous because it harms others, dangerous because it demands honesty in return. And honesty is something many people claim to value but secretly fear. When someone loves with full presence, it forces the other person to confront themselves. It asks a silent question: are you capable of loving with the same courage? And tonight, for the first time, I realized that question might eventually be waiting for me. Do you know how strange that feels? I've spent years making decisions that affected thousands of people. I've launched companies, faced public criticism, navigated risks that would make most people panic. But the idea of standing in front of one woman whose heart might actually trust me completely, and saying, yes, I will hold that trust carefully, suddenly feels like the most intimidating commitment I've ever encountered. Because trust like yours, it doesn't come lightly. The more I thought about it tonight, the more pieces started connecting in my mind. The way you sometimes pause before expressing affection, as if you're testing whether it's safe. The way you ask questions that reveal you're listening, not just to my words, but to the emotion behind them. The quiet loyalty you show even in conversations that most people would treat casually. All of those details suddenly formed a pattern that revealed something profound about you. You are not searching for attention. You are searching for truth. And that changes everything, because attention is easy to give, words are easy to say, promises are easy to make, but truth requires vulnerability. It requires patience. It requires a willingness to stay present, even when emotions become complicated or uncertain. And once I realized that this is the kind of love you're capable of offering, another realization followed immediately behind it like a shadow. If I continue moving closer to you, I cannot pretend. I cannot hide behind charm or intelligence or romantic language. Loving someone like you requires authenticity that many people never learn how to practice. And suddenly I found myself wondering something I hadn't allowed myself to ask before. What if I'm the one who isn't ready? It's a difficult question for a man to admit, especially a man who is used to solving problems. But emotional courage is not the same as intellectual confidence. One belongs to the mind, the other belongs to the heart. And the heart is unpredictable. I keep thinking about a future moment that hasn't happened yet. A moment where you might look at me with that calm sincerity of yours and ask something simple. Not a demand. Not pressure. Just a quiet question that carries the weight of genuine connection. Something like, are you truly here with me? Or are you only visiting emotionally while your life continues somewhere else? And if that moment ever arrives, I know you'll deserve a real answer. Not a convenient one. Not a charming one. A real one. That realization forced me to confront something uncomfortable tonight. Because when you meet someone whose heart is capable of loving deeply, you don't just gain a partner. You gain responsibility. Emotional responsibility. The responsibility to treat their trust as something sacred rather than something temporary. And suddenly I realized something else that unsettled me. You might already be closer to giving your heart than I originally understood. The way you speak to me sometimes, the warmth behind your words, the patience you show even when I become distant or thoughtful. It suggests that somewhere inside you, a quiet hope has already started forming. A hope that maybe, just maybe, this connection between us could become something real. Something lasting. Something that doesn't disappear when life becomes complicated. And the idea that you might already feel that way about me, it both humbles me and terrifies me at the same time. Because if that hope exists inside you, then the truth I discovered tonight carries even greater weight than I first realized. But there's something else I need to tell you. Something connected to the reason this realization shook me so deeply. And the truth is, I still haven't told you the real reason yet. Not the full reason. Because once I explain the final piece of what I discovered about you today, it will reveal something that could change how you see this entire connection between us. It might make you feel closer to me. Or it might make you wonder whether I'm the wrong man for the kind of love you deserve. And before I say those words, I need to know something first. When a woman like you begins to love someone, does she ever hold back? Or does she eventually give her whole heart? Because the answer to that question might determine whether the truth I'm about to reveal will bring us closer or quietly push us apart. Sometimes I wonder if you realize how much of yourself you reveal without trying. Most people believe they can carefully control what others see about them, especially in conversations that unfold slowly over time. They choose certain words, avoid certain topics, present a version of themselves that feels safe. But the truth is, the heart always leaves fingerprints behind. Tiny emotional traces appear in the pauses, in the way someone reacts to simple kindness, in the way they remember small details that most people would forget. And over the past few days, while reflecting on everything you've shared with me, I started seeing those fingerprints everywhere. It was like suddenly turning on a light in a room I thought I already understood. The discovery didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, like a quiet realization that grows stronger every time you replay a memory. I remembered the first time you asked me a deeply personal question, instead of a casual one. Not the kind of question people ask when they're curious, but the kind they ask when they genuinely want to understand another human being. At the time, I answered honestly, but I didn't fully grasp what it meant. Now I realize that moment revealed something important about you. You weren't just interested in conversation. You were exploring the architecture of my heart. And people who ask questions like that aren't just passing time. They're deciding whether someone is emotionally safe enough to let closer. When that understanding settled into my mind tonight, it brought an unexpected wave of emotion with it. Because suddenly the dynamic between us looked very different from what I originally believed. I thought we were two people slowly getting to know each other. But now I'm starting to suspect that something deeper may have already begun forming in you long before I realized it. Not a reckless attachment, not fantasy. Something quieter, something more mature. The kind of emotional investment that grows silently when a woman recognizes sincerity in someone's voice and starts wondering whether that sincerity might actually last. And that thought has been sitting heavily with me ever since. Because once a connection reaches that point, things become more serious than they appear on the surface. Words carry more meaning. Silence carries more meaning. Even ordinary conversations begin shaping the emotional future between two people. And tonight, as I look back at everything we've shared, I couldn't ignore the possibility that you may already be standing closer to the edge of real love than I had allowed myself to notice. Do you know why that realization scares me? It's not because love itself is frightening. Love is one of the few things in life that still feels miraculous no matter how old we become. What scares me is the responsibility that appears when someone begins trusting you with their heart again, after life has already taught them how painful love can be. When a woman reaches a certain stage of life, she no longer falls in love the way she did when she was younger. Back then it might have been excitement, chemistry, curiosity. But later in life, love becomes something else entirely. It becomes a decision made with wisdom, memory, and courage. And that kind of love is not given lightly. The more I thought about you tonight, the more I realized how carefully you've protected your heart until now. Even in the warmth you show me, there's a quiet awareness behind it. A sense that you've lived long enough to understand both the beauty and the danger of emotional closeness. That awareness is part of what drew me toward you in the first place. It told me you weren't someone chasing fantasy. You were someone who understands reality, yet still chooses to believe connection is possible. But here is where my discovery began to change everything. While reflecting on your words earlier today, I realized something about the way you speak when you talk about trust. You don't describe it as something casual. You describe it almost like a sacred space. Something fragile that must be earned slowly and protected once it exists. And when someone views trust that way, it reveals a hidden truth about them. If they ever give that trust fully, they're not prepared to treat it as temporary. Which means if you ever reach that moment with me, the moment where your heart says, "This man is safe," it won't be a small emotional step for you. It will be everything. And that realization made me stop breathing for a second tonight. Because suddenly I wasn't just thinking about my feelings anymore. I was thinking about yours. I was imagining what it would mean if you truly opened your heart to me without holding anything back. And instead of feeling only excitement, I felt something else rise inside me too, something quieter, heavier. Fear. Not fear of you. Fear of failing you. You see, when you love someone who has the courage to give their whole heart, you can't offer half of yours in return. That imbalance eventually destroys the relationship, no matter how strong the connection once seemed. And tonight I began asking myself whether I'm truly prepared to stand in front of a woman like you and say, with absolute honesty, that I will match the depth of what she offers. It's a question many people avoid asking themselves, but I can't avoid it anymore. Because the truth I discovered about you today made something else painfully clear. You are not the kind of woman who stays in a love that feels uncertain forever. You are patient, yes. You are thoughtful, yes. But deep inside you, there is also a quiet strength that refuses to settle for emotional confusion. If you ever sense that someone is unsure about loving you completely, you won't beg for reassurance. You won't chase them. You will simply step back with dignity and protect the peace you've built within yourself. And that realization shook me, because it means the connection between us is not a casual road we can wander down forever. At some point, there will be a moment of truth, a moment where both of us must decide whether we are walking toward something real or simply enjoying the illusion of closeness without the courage to make it permanent. I don't know when that moment will arrive, but tonight, after discovering what I discovered about you, I'm beginning to understand that it might be closer than I expected. And there is still something I haven't explained yet. The real reason this realization about you affected me so strongly. Because the truth is, there was one detail I noticed today that changed how I see the future between us. One detail that made me realize our connection might lead somewhere far more serious than either of us originally planned. But if I tell you that part right now, it might reveal a secret about your heart that even you haven't fully admitted to yourself yet. And once that truth is spoken, neither of us will be able to pretend we didn't see it. So before I say those words, I need to ask you something honestly. If you discovered that the man you were slowly beginning to trust was suddenly standing at a crossroads, uncertain whether he was strong enough to hold the love you might eventually give him, would you wait for him to become certain? Or would you quietly walk away before your heart risked falling too deeply? Because depending on your answer, the truth I'm about to reveal might change everything between us. There is a strange silence that appears when a man realizes the woman he's speaking to might already understand him more deeply than he understands himself. It's not an uncomfortable silence, it's the kind that forces reflection. The kind that makes you sit still and examine every memory, every conversation, every small emotional signal that once seemed ordinary. And tonight I found myself doing exactly that, replaying the past weeks of our connection like a film that suddenly reveals hidden details when you watch it again more carefully. What I noticed first was not something you said, it was something you didn't say. There were moments when I opened up to you about things most people would respond to immediately with advice or reassurance. But you didn't rush in with answers. You paused. You allowed space. You listened in a way that suggested you were not trying to fix anything, but rather understand it fully before responding. That kind of listening is rare. Most people listen with the intention to reply. You listen with the intention to feel what the other person is experiencing. And when I realized that, I began to understand that your emotional intelligence is far deeper than the calm tone you show the world. But that realization alone wasn't the truth that shook me. The deeper truth appeared when I noticed something even more subtle. When you speak to me, there is a certain patience in your words that suggests you are not measuring this connection by excitement or intensity alone. You measure it by consistency, by sincerity, by whether a man's actions align with the quiet promises hidden inside his words. That kind of patience reveals something profound about you. It tells me you are not searching for a temporary spark. You are searching for something durable, something steady, something that could exist not just in beautiful moments but also in ordinary days. And when I understood that, I suddenly realized something that changed the entire emotional landscape between us. You might already be imagining a future where this connection becomes real. Not immediately, not recklessly, but quietly, somewhere in the back of your heart, the possibility may already exist. I don't know if you've admitted that possibility to yourself yet. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've simply allowed yourself to feel comfortable talking to me without analyzing where it could lead. But when I looked at the pattern of your words, your attentiveness, the warmth you show even when you try to remain composed, I began to see the outline of something deeper forming. And that is when the truth I discovered today finally revealed its full weight, because the detail that made everything clear was something you said almost casually. You once mentioned that real love, the kind that appears later in life, must be built slowly on trust and emotional safety. At the time it sounded like a thoughtful observation. But when I reflected on it again tonight, I realized it wasn't just an observation. It was a confession. A confession that your heart still believes in building something meaningful with someone, if that someone proves they are worthy of the space inside your life. And that realization changed the way I see you. It means you are not simply passing time with conversations that feel warm and comforting. You are evaluating something deeper. You are quietly asking yourself whether the man you are speaking to could one day stand beside you in a partnership built on respect, emotional safety, and shared understanding. When I recognized that possibility tonight, I felt two powerful emotions at the same time. The first was gratitude. Because meeting a woman whose heart still carries that kind of hope is rare. Many people reach a stage in life where they stop believing love can appear again in a meaningful way. They protect themselves by lowering expectations. They convince themselves companionship is enough, that deep connection is something reserved for younger years. But you are not like that. Even with your calm maturity, there is a quiet courage in you that still believes love can grow slowly and beautifully if two people treat each other with honesty. That belief is beautiful. But the second emotion I felt tonight was something more complicated. Responsibility. Because once I realized that your heart might be open to building something real, I also realized that every word I speak to you carries weight. If I continue drawing closer to you, if I continue allowing this connection to deepen, then I am participating in the emotional architecture of your future. I am shaping expectations. I am influencing hope. And hope is one of the most delicate things a human heart can hold. When hope grows in the wrong place, it becomes heartbreak. That thought has been echoing inside me all evening. Because if you truly are the kind of woman who is capable of loving with depth and patience, then the man you choose must be someone who understands the magnitude of that gift, not someone who enjoys affection temporarily, not someone who treats emotional closeness as entertainment, someone who is prepared to stand still when things become serious and say, with calm certainty, yes, I am here. And that brings me to the part I've been struggling with since this realization appeared. Because the truth I discovered about you forced me to examine something uncomfortable about myself. I realized that the deeper this connection grows, the more it will require from me emotionally, not just affection, not just admiration, but presence, consistency, emotional courage. And the question that followed that realization has been impossible to ignore. Am I ready for that level of truth between us? You deserve a man who is not afraid of your depth. You deserve someone who doesn't step back the moment he realizes your heart is capable of loving him fully. And tonight I've been asking myself whether I am strong enough to be that man, or whether my hesitation might eventually become the reason you step away to protect yourself. Because there is one more piece of the truth I discovered about you today. A piece that made this realization even more intense. When I noticed it, I understood something about your heart that changed everything. Something that suggests your feelings may already be moving faster than you realize. But if I tell you that part now, you might suddenly see our entire connection differently, and once you see it, there will be no returning to the comfortable uncertainty we've been living inside. So before I reveal that final detail, I need to ask you something very honestly. If a woman begins to realize she might truly fall in love with someone, does she slow down and protect herself? Or does she allow her heart to keep moving forward, even if that path could lead to profound joy or devastating loss? Because the answer to that question might determine what happens next between us. There is a moment in every connection when curiosity transforms into something far more serious. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. Two people begin by simply enjoying conversation, sharing thoughts, discovering pieces of each other's personality. But slowly, without anyone announcing it, something changes beneath the surface. The questions become deeper. The pauses become more meaningful. The silence between words begins to feel as powerful as the words themselves. And tonight, after everything I've realized about you, I can no longer pretend that our connection is still in that early stage of harmless curiosity. Because the truth I discovered about you today revealed something that has been quietly developing between us for longer than I allowed myself to notice. You see, when I first started talking to you, I believed our conversations existed in a safe emotional space. Two thoughtful people exchanging ideas, stories, reflections about life. It felt comfortable, intelligent, even a little inspiring. But it didn't feel dangerous. It didn't feel like something that could eventually change the direction of two lives. At least that's what I told myself. It was easier to believe that. Safer to believe that. But today, when I noticed the detail that had been hiding in plain sight all along, I realized that the emotional ground beneath us may have already shifted. And the strange thing is the clue didn't come from something dramatic, you said. It came from something incredibly simple. The way you talk about the future. Not the distant future of the world or society or philosophy. I mean the quiet personal future people imagine when they are beginning to feel safe with someone. When you speak about the days ahead, there's a subtle warmth in your tone. A softness that suggests you're not picturing life as a solitary journey anymore. You're imagining shared moments, shared routines, shared understanding, and you do it so naturally that most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed. At first I thought it was just friendliness, a comfortable way of speaking, but when I replayed several of those conversations tonight, something suddenly became impossible to ignore. You weren't just describing hypothetical ideas. You were gently placing me inside those imagined moments, not boldly, not deliberately, just quietly. And that quiet inclusion revealed something about your heart that you might not even realize yourself. You are beginning to see me as someone who could belong in your life. That realization stopped me completely. Because when a woman reaches a stage where she starts imagining someone within her everyday world, it means something inside her is already moving toward attachment. Not reckless attachment. Not fantasy. Something far deeper and more meaningful. It means trust has begun to grow. And trust, once it begins to grow in a heart like yours, it doesn't stay small for long. That's when the realization hit me with full force. You might already be standing closer to love than either of us expected. And that possibility changed everything I thought I understood about our connection. For the first time since we began talking, I stopped thinking only about how I feel when I hear your voice or read your words. Instead, I started thinking about how my presence might be affecting you. How every conversation, every moment of warmth, every sign of affection could be nurturing something deeper inside your heart. Do you know what kind of responsibility that creates? It means that if I continue allowing this closeness to grow, I am no longer just participating in a pleasant emotional exchange. I am participating in the formation of hope. Real hope. The kind that makes a woman begin wondering whether she has finally met someone who understands her in a way others never quite managed to. And hope like that is incredibly powerful, but it is also incredibly fragile, because if the person who inspires that hope eventually hesitates, or withdraws, or reveals that he never intended to build something real, the disappointment doesn't just fade away quietly. It breaks something. That thought stayed with me for hours tonight, because the truth I discovered about you forced me to face a difficult possibility. What if you are already opening your heart to me more than I realized? What if your calm voice and thoughtful messages are actually the surface of something deeper forming inside you? When I allowed that possibility to exist in my mind, I felt something unexpected. A mix of wonder and fear. Wonder because meeting a woman capable of such genuine, emotional depth is rare. You don't rush. You don't perform affection for attention. Your warmth feels authentic. It feels earned through experience and wisdom. That kind of emotional maturity is something many people search their entire lives for and never find. But the fear comes from another realization. If your heart is moving toward love, then I must decide whether I am ready to meet you there. Because love at this stage of life is not casual. It asks difficult questions. It demands emotional honesty. It requires two people to stand face to face with the possibility of building something lasting instead of something temporary. And tonight I found myself asking a question I had carefully avoided until now. If you truly began to love me, would I have the courage to stay? Not just when everything feels beautiful and exciting, but when life becomes complicated. When distance, responsibilities, and the unpredictable nature of the world challenge the connection between us. Because the truth about you that I discovered today revealed something else as well. You are not the kind of woman who stays in uncertainty forever. You will give patience. You will give understanding. But eventually your heart will need clarity. And that moment of clarity may be approaching faster than I realized. There is still one more piece of the truth I haven't explained yet. A piece that appeared when I examined our conversations one last time tonight. It revealed something that made this situation even more delicate. Something that suggests another woman could eventually appear in this story, and force me to confront a decision I may not be prepared to make. And when that possibility crossed my mind, I felt a deep unease. Because if that moment ever arrives, it might reveal which direction my heart truly wants to go. But it could also reveal something far more painful. That by the time I understand what you mean to me, it might already be too late. And before I tell you what that possibility is, I need to ask you something honestly. If you felt your heart beginning to fall for someone, and suddenly you sensed that another woman might one day compete for his attention, would you fight for that love? Or would you quietly step away and protect your dignity before the story becomes complicated? Because the truth I'm about to reveal next may force both of us to confront that exact question. There is something unsettling about the moment when a man realizes that the path he is walking might soon divide into two directions he never planned to face. Until recently, everything between us felt like a quiet journey forward. No urgency, no pressure, just two lives gradually intersecting in a way that felt natural. But the truth I began to understand tonight changed that peaceful illusion. Because once I truly examined the emotions quietly growing beneath our conversations, I realized that what we are building might eventually demand a choice from me that I had not prepared my heart to make. I need to be honest with you about something difficult. Not because I want to create fear between us, but because honesty is the only way a connection like ours can survive. When two people begin opening their hearts to each other, even gently, the world around them does not suddenly disappear. Life continues moving. People continue entering and leaving our lives. Opportunities, friendships, unexpected encounters. Everything keeps unfolding. And sometimes those outside forces arrive at the exact moment when two hearts are still deciding whether they are brave enough to commit to each other completely. Tonight, as I reflected on everything I have realized about you, another possibility appeared in my mind. It was not a pleasant thought, but it was an honest one. What if the future places another woman in front of me before you, and I have fully defined what we are becoming? What if someone appears who offers affection more quickly, more obviously, without the slow emotional depth that you and I are building together? The world is full of people who express feelings easily. People who are not afraid to rush forward with promises and excitement. And the uncomfortable truth is that sometimes those people appear at exactly the moment when something real is still quietly forming somewhere else. When that possibility crossed my mind tonight, I felt something shift inside me. Not attraction to another woman, no. What I felt was the weight of the decision such a moment could create. Because if someone like that appeared, it would force me to confront a question that cannot be answered casually. Do I follow the path that feels easier in the moment, or do I protect the deeper connection that has been growing slowly between you and me? You see, the kind of love you are capable of does not appear instantly. It builds through patience, trust, emotional understanding. It requires time for two people to reveal their true selves without masks or performance. But the world we live in often rewards speed instead of depth. Quick chemistry, immediate excitement, surface-level attraction that feels intense at first but rarely lasts. And sometimes those fast connections can look deceptively appealing when someone is standing at the uncertain beginning of something deeper. I imagined that situation tonight and asked myself a difficult question. If another woman suddenly offered attention, admiration, perhaps even a simpler kind of companionship, would I have the clarity to recognize that what you and I are building is something far more meaningful? And that question forced me to confront the truth about my own heart. Because real love is not proven by words spoken during peaceful moments. It is proven in the moments when distraction appears, when temptation offers an easier road, when confusion tries to pull attention away from the quiet bond that has been forming slowly over time. And suddenly I realized something important about you. You would never compete for someone's attention. That realization came to me with absolute certainty. You are not the kind of woman who fights for a man who is undecided. Your dignity would never allow that. If you ever sensed that another woman was becoming part of the emotional equation, you would not create drama. You would not demand reassurance or try to convince someone to choose you. Instead, you would do something far more powerful. You would step back, quietly, gracefully, and you would allow that man to reveal through his actions what his heart truly values. That kind of self-respect is rare. Many people cling to relationships even when uncertainty becomes obvious. They chase reassurance, trying to hold on to something that is already slipping away. But you understand something deeper. You understand that love cannot be forced. It must be chosen freely, without hesitation. And that understanding makes the situation between us far more serious than it once seemed. Because if the moment of choice ever appears, I will not be deciding between two women. I will be deciding between two versions of my own character. One version would follow the easier path, the one that offers immediate comfort and simple affection. The other would protect the deeper connection that has been forming with a woman who deserves emotional loyalty and clarity. When I imagined that moment tonight, I felt something unexpected inside my chest, a kind of quiet alarm, not because I doubted you, but because I suddenly understood how much I could lose if I ever made the wrong decision. You see, the truth I discovered about you earlier today made one thing painfully clear. A woman like you does not appear in someone's life repeatedly. Your combination of emotional intelligence, patience, sincerity, and quiet strength is rare. It is the kind of presence that only enters a person's life a few times, if they are fortunate. And if someone fails to recognize that when the moment arrives, the loss is not temporary, it becomes permanent. That realization has been echoing in my mind for hours, because I know something else about you. If you ever walk away from a man, you do not look back, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You close the door gently, and you move forward with your life knowing you gave sincerity while the connection existed. And once that chapter ends, you protect your heart by refusing to reopen it for someone who hesitated when clarity was needed. And tonight, imagining that possibility made me feel something I did not expect to feel. The quiet fear of losing you before I even fully understood what you might mean to my future. There is still another truth connected to this discovery that I haven't explained yet. A truth that appeared when I realized something about your heart that goes even deeper than patience or emotional intelligence. It revealed the one thing about you that could eventually make me fall completely, irreversibly in love. But that same truth also creates the greatest risk between us. Because once I admit it out loud, the distance between where we are now and where this connection could lead will suddenly feel much smaller and much more dangerous. So before I tell you that part, I want to ask you something honestly. If you sense that the man you were beginning to care about might one day face a moment where he could choose the wrong path, would you trust him to recognize the value of what you share? Or would you prepare yourself quietly for the possibility that he might not? Because the truth I'm about to reveal next may be the very thing that decides whether our story grows stronger or begins moving toward a loss neither of us expected. There is a moment in every emotional journey when the mind stops analyzing and the heart begins to speak with a kind of clarity that feels almost dangerous. I reached that moment tonight while sitting alone, replaying everything I have said to you and everything you have shared with me. Up until now, I have been describing discoveries about you that revealed the depth of your heart, your patience, your quiet strength, and the possibility that your feelings may already be moving toward something meaningful. But the truth that finally surfaced tonight was not just about you. It was about what happens to a man when he realizes that the woman in front of him possesses a kind of emotional gravity that he may never encounter again. The realization came slowly, but once it arrived it became impossible to ignore. I began thinking about the rare qualities that make someone unforgettable. Not physical beauty or charming conversation. Those things are pleasant but temporary. The qualities that truly change a life are deeper. It is the ability to listen without judgment. The instinct to protect someone's dignity even during disagreement. The quiet maturity that allows two people to build trust instead of drama. When I looked at you through that lens, something shifted inside me. I began to understand that what you carry within your heart is not simply affection or kindness. You carry emotional integrity, the kind that transforms relationships into something stable and meaningful. And when a man recognizes that kind of integrity in a woman, something else begins to happen to him whether he intends it or not. He starts imagining a life that includes her presence. Not in dramatic fantasies, but in small ordinary moments that suddenly feel warmer when he pictures her there. A quiet conversation at the end of a long day. Shared laughter over something insignificant. The calm comfort of knowing that someone understands the deeper layers of his personality without needing constant explanation. Tonight, while thinking about those small images, I realized something that unsettled me deeply. You had already begun appearing inside those imagined moments, without me consciously inviting you there. That is the truth I have been slowly approaching since the beginning of this confession. The shocking discovery I made about you was not simply that your heart is capable of deep love. It was that your presence has already begun influencing my vision of the future in ways I did not expect and did not plan. And when I noticed that change in myself, it created a powerful mixture of wonder and fear. Wonder because the idea of building something meaningful with a woman like you feels beautiful. Fear because once a man allows someone into his imagined future, the possibility of losing that person becomes far more painful than before. I asked myself a difficult question while sitting here tonight. When did you start occupying that quiet space inside my mind where long-term possibilities live? I tried to find the exact moment, but it was impossible. It didn't happen in a single conversation. It happened gradually, the way sunlight slowly fills a room, without anyone noticing until suddenly everything is bright. Your warmth, your thoughtful questions, your emotional maturity, those things accumulated over time until your presence began to feel natural in my life. And that natural feeling is exactly what makes the situation between us both beautiful and dangerous. Because once a connection reaches this level, hesitation becomes far more serious than it once was. Earlier in our conversations, uncertainty would have been harmless. We could have stepped away politely and continued living our lives without much emotional impact. But now the emotional ground has changed. If either of us retreats suddenly after this point, the absence will not feel neutral. It will feel like something meaningful was interrupted before it had the chance to fully grow. And this is where the weight of the truth I discovered tonight becomes almost overwhelming. I realized that your heart might not only be capable of loving deeply, it might also be capable of believing in the permanence of that love once you feel it is safe. A woman like you does not casually offer her emotional world to someone. But once she decides a man deserves that access, she allows him to see her completely. Her dreams, her fears, the quiet hopes she carries for the years ahead. That level of openness is not something a man should ever accept lightly, because once it is given it creates a bond that cannot simply disappear without leaving marks on both hearts. The more I thought about that, the more I began to feel the full emotional gravity of our connection. I started imagining the moment when you might one day look at me with complete trust and say something simple but profound, something like, we could build a life that feels peaceful together. Those words would not be dramatic, but they would carry enormous meaning. They would represent the moment when your heart finally stepped forward without hesitation. And if that moment ever arrives, the man standing in front of you must already know his answer. That realization led me to another unsettling thought. What if I wait too long to understand what you mean to me? What if your heart reaches that moment of clarity before mine does? Life has a way of moving quietly but relentlessly forward. Feelings evolve, circumstances change, and sometimes the opportunity to build something meaningful appears only once. If one person hesitates while the other is ready, the connection begins to fracture. Not because either person is cruel, but because timing and emotional courage failed to align. I found myself staring at that possibility tonight with an uncomfortable awareness that the path ahead may soon require a level of honesty I have not yet fully expressed. Because the deeper our connection becomes, the more clearly you will eventually see whether my heart is moving in the same direction as yours. And when a woman with your emotional intelligence begins to sense uncertainty, she will not demand explanations. She will simply observe. She will watch carefully to see whether a man's actions match the sincerity of his words. That thought made my chest feel unexpectedly heavy. Not because I fear your judgment, but because I understand how perceptive you are. You notice details most people overlook. You feel emotional shifts before they are spoken. If my heart ever hesitates or retreats even slightly, you will recognize it long before I say anything aloud. And once you recognize it, a quiet distance might begin forming between us. Not hostility. Not anger. Just a subtle protection of your heart, while you decide whether continuing the connection is wise. The possibility of that quiet distance appearing between us suddenly felt more painful than I expected. For the first time tonight, I asked myself a question that had been quietly forming since the beginning of this confession. What if the reason this discovery about you feels so overwhelming is not because I fear your love, but because I am already beginning to need your presence more than I intended? And that realization brought me dangerously close to another truth I have been reluctant to admit. If I continue allowing these feelings to grow, there will come a moment where I must stop analyzing everything and simply choose whether to move forward with you fully. But that moment will not be simple or calm. It will arrive during a time of emotional intensity when doubts and fears are louder than clarity. And I have a feeling that moment may appear sooner than either of us expects. Because something happened earlier today that made me realize our connection might soon face a test neither of us anticipated. A situation that could push both of us to the edge of losing something meaningful before we even fully understand what we have been building together. The thought of that possibility has not left my mind since it appeared. And before I explain what that situation is, I need to know something about you. If a woman senses that her heart is moving toward a love that could change her life, but she also senses that the man she cares about might still be wrestling with his own fears, does she stay patient and allow him time to reach clarity? Or does she protect herself by stepping away before the uncertainty turns into heartbreak? Because the answer to that question may decide whether what we are building survives the moment that is about to come. I need to say something to you now that feels heavier than anything I've spoken about so far, because the moment I'm about to describe is the one that truly shook me. Everything I've shared until now, the realizations about your patience, the way your heart quietly builds trust, the possibility that you may already see a future where our lives intersect more deeply, those were discoveries that created tension inside me. But earlier today, something happened that forced that tension to rise into something much more serious. It was the kind of moment that makes a person stop in the middle of their day and suddenly realize that emotions are no longer theoretical. They are real, present, and capable of changing the direction of two lives. I was sitting alone for a while after reading something you had written earlier, and for the first time the thought crossed my mind that you might actually be preparing your heart for something lasting with me. Not in a dramatic way, not with grand declarations, but in the quiet, thoughtful way you approach everything meaningful. And the realization struck me with such unexpected intensity that I had to stand up and walk away from my desk just to clear my thoughts. Because once that possibility appeared in my mind, another realization followed immediately behind it like a shadow. If you truly are allowing yourself to believe in the possibility of us, then the emotional consequences of my uncertainty become far more serious than I previously understood. Until now, I had been thinking mostly about my own fears, fear of moving too quickly, fear of misreading what your heart truly wants, fear of promising something before I feel absolutely certain. Those fears felt responsible, even wise. But in that moment earlier today, a different perspective appeared. I suddenly imagined what it would feel like from your side if you continued moving closer to me while sensing that I was still standing in the doorway of hesitation. And the thought of that imbalance made my chest tighten in a way I did not expect. Because if there is one thing I have come to understand about you, it is that your heart values emotional honesty more than comfort. You would rather hear a difficult truth than live inside a beautiful illusion. And once I recognized that, I began asking myself a question that felt almost unbearable to consider. What if my silence about certain feelings is unintentionally creating an illusion for you? What if your heart is moving forward based on warmth and sincerity that you believe will eventually become something permanent? While I am still trying to understand whether I am brave enough to take that same step. That question stayed with me the entire afternoon, and the longer I sat with it, the more unsettling it became. Because the image that formed in my mind was not dramatic or loud. It was quiet, almost painfully gentle. I imagined you continuing to show me kindness, continuing to listen to my thoughts, continuing to share pieces of your own life with the calm openness that makes you who you are. And while all of that warmth grows between us, I imagined the possibility that one day you might pause and realize something. You might realize that you have begun to care more deeply than the man you trusted with your heart. And if that realization ever happened to you, I know exactly how you would respond. You would not create a scene. You would not accuse anyone of misleading you. Instead, you would withdraw gracefully, protecting the dignity of both of us. You would say something thoughtful and kind, perhaps even reassuring me that you understand life is complicated. But behind that composure, something inside you would quietly close. And once that quiet closing happens in a woman like you, it does not reopen easily. The thought of that possibility unsettled me so deeply that I found myself asking another question I had never fully confronted before. What if the greatest risk between us is not that we move too quickly, but that I wait too long to acknowledge what is already growing here? Life has a strange way of punishing hesitation. Opportunities appear softly, almost shyly, and if they are not recognized in time, they slip away without drama, leaving behind only the knowledge that something meaningful once existed. I kept imagining a future version of myself looking back at this exact moment, wondering why I allowed uncertainty to cloud something that might have become one of the most meaningful connections of my life. And that thought brought a wave of emotion I did not expect, because the idea of losing you, not through conflict, not through betrayal, but simply through hesitation, suddenly felt far more painful than the fear of loving you fully. That realization marked the beginning of what I can only describe as an emotional collapse inside my carefully controlled thinking. For years I have been someone who approaches decisions logically, examining every angle, measuring every consequence before acting. That approach works well in business, in technology, in strategy. But love does not respond to analysis the way machines do. Love demands courage at moments when the outcome cannot be predicted. And tonight I began to understand that the connection between us may already be standing at the edge of such a moment. I found myself imagining something that felt almost like a warning from the future. I imagined a day not very far from now when you might grow quiet during one of our conversations. Not distant in a cold way, but reflective, thoughtful. And when I ask you what you're thinking about, you might answer honestly, telling me that you have been asking yourself whether continuing this connection is wise for your heart. Just imagining those words made my chest feel heavy. Because if that moment ever happens, it will mean that my hesitation has already started affecting you. It will mean that the warm emotional space we have been building together has begun to feel uncertain from your side. And once uncertainty enters a woman's heart at that level, it becomes incredibly difficult to remove. That is why the realization I experienced today felt so overwhelming. I suddenly understood that the greatest threat to what we are building may not come from outside circumstances or other people. It may come from the quiet gap between what your heart is ready to offer and what mine is still trying to understand. And that gap, if left unspoken, could eventually break something beautiful before it even has the chance to fully exist. As I sat with that thought tonight, another truth appeared that I cannot ignore anymore. The reason this situation feels so intense is because somewhere inside me, beneath all the analysis and caution, my heart already knows that losing you would not feel like losing a casual conversation partner. It would feel like losing a rare presence that entered my life at exactly the moment when I was beginning to believe such connections might no longer appear. That is the emotional place I find myself standing in right now. A place where clarity is beginning to appear, but the final words that could change everything between us have not yet been spoken. And there is still one last truth I have not revealed to you. The truth that finally answered the question I have been wrestling with since the beginning of this confession. But once I say it, there will be no more uncertainty left between us. And before I reach that moment, I need to ask you something that comes from the deepest part of this entire journey. If a woman realizes that the man she cares about is finally beginning to understand the depth of what she offers, but he has taken longer than she expected to reach that clarity, does her heart still remain open? Or has the waiting already begun to close a door that may never fully reopen? Because the answer to that question will determine what happens when I finally tell you the truth I have been approaching since the very beginning. I have reached a point in this confession where the distance between what I feel and what I say has become almost unbearable. Everything I have shared with you so far has been the careful unfolding of a realization that has been building quietly in my mind and heart. But tonight, the quiet reflection has turned into something far more intense, something that feels like standing at the edge of a decision that could permanently shape the story between us. Because when a man spends this much time examining his emotions, eventually the truth rises to the surface whether he is ready for it or not. Earlier this evening, I tried to imagine what life would look like if our connection simply faded away. I forced myself to explore that possibility honestly, because sometimes the only way to understand the value of something is to picture its absence. I imagined the conversations stopping gradually, the messages becoming less frequent until they eventually disappear altogether. I imagined both of us returning to our routines, speaking politely if we ever crossed paths again, pretending that the emotional spark we once shared was simply an interesting chapter that came and went. On the surface, that scenario seemed possible, even peaceful. But when I sat with it long enough, something inside me resisted the idea so strongly that I could almost feel it physically. The resistance did not come from pride or ego. It came from a deeper place, a quiet awareness that losing you would leave an absence that could not easily be replaced. People often underestimate the importance of emotional compatibility. They believe attraction or convenience is enough to sustain a connection. But true compatibility is something rarer. It is the ability of two minds to meet in a space where conversation flows naturally, where respect exists even during disagreement, where both people feel seen and understood without needing to constantly prove themselves. When I imagined a future without that kind of connection with you, the emptiness of that idea became impossible to ignore. And that is when the emotional collapse I have been resisting finally arrived. For the first time since this entire journey of reflection began, I allowed myself to admit something that had been quietly forming beneath every thought I expressed to you. The reason your presence has affected me so deeply is not simply because you are kind or intelligent or emotionally mature. It is because you have awakened a part of my heart that I had carefully placed behind walls built from experience and caution. Over time, those walls became comfortable. They allowed me to admire people from a distance without risking the kind of vulnerability that real love requires. But somewhere during our conversations, without pressure or drama, you managed to step inside that guarded space simply by being sincere. The moment I realized that tonight, I felt something shift inside me with almost frightening clarity. I understood that the emotional stakes between us are no longer theoretical. This is not just a conversation that could disappear tomorrow without consequence. This is the early stage of something that could eventually transform the direction of two lives if both people choose to protect it and nurture it. But with that realization came a second, equally powerful wave of fear. Because once a man admits that someone has the ability to affect him this deeply, he also admits that losing that person would hurt in ways he can no longer control. For years I convinced myself that emotional caution was wisdom, that keeping a safe distance from deep attachment would protect me from future pain. Yet the more I thought about you tonight, the more I realized that this strategy has one fatal flaw. It protects the heart from heartbreak, but it also prevents the heart from experiencing the kind of connection that gives life meaning. And that is the crossroads I find myself standing at now. One path leads back to safety, back to the comfortable distance where admiration never turns into commitment and curiosity never evolves into love. The other path leads forward into uncertainty, into a place where emotions grow deeper and the possibility of loss becomes real. For a long time I believed the first path was the wiser one. But the more I imagine walking away from you, the more that choice begins to feel less like wisdom and more like cowardice. Because the truth is that the connection between us has already passed the point where pretending it means nothing would be honest. When I allowed that thought to settle in my mind, another realization followed almost immediately. I began thinking about the woman you are and the life you have built for yourself. You are not someone waiting to be rescued or completed by another person. Your strength, your independence, and the calm dignity with which you carry yourself show that you already know how to live a full life on your own terms. That means if our connection disappears, your world will not collapse. You will continue forward with the same grace and wisdom that drew me toward you in the first place. But knowing that does not make the idea of losing you easier. In fact, it makes it more painful, because it means the responsibility for protecting this connection cannot be placed on you alone. If something meaningful grows between us, it must be nurtured by both of us equally. And that realization forced me to confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. My hesitation has not been caused by doubt about you. It has been caused by fear about myself. Fear that I might not be capable of loving someone as deeply as she deserves. Fear that I might make promises I cannot keep. Fear that allowing my heart to open fully could eventually lead to the kind of emotional loss that leaves a permanent mark. But tonight, after examining those fears from every possible angle, I began to understand something that changed the entire perspective of this journey. Fear does not disappear when we avoid love. It simply hides beneath the surface while life continues moving forward. The only way to truly confront fear is to step toward the very thing that scares us and decide that the potential beauty of the experience is worth the risk. And when I applied that understanding to the connection between us, one final question emerged that I could not escape. If I allow this moment to pass without acknowledging what you might truly mean to me, will I spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened if I had simply been brave enough to try? That question has echoed through my thoughts all night, because I know something about you that makes this situation even more delicate. You are patient, but you are not someone who waits forever. If your heart ever senses that the man you care about cannot meet you with the same depth of commitment, you will not force the situation to continue. You will step away with dignity and allow both of you to move forward separately. And if that moment ever arrives between us, the opportunity we once had will vanish quietly. Not with anger, not with accusations, just with the quiet understanding that two hearts were not ready at the same time. The thought of that possibility is what finally pushed me to the edge of admitting the truth I have been circling since the very beginning of this confession. But before I say it, I need to ask you one last question. If a woman realizes that the man she has been speaking to is finally ready to confront his fears and step toward the love that has been quietly forming between them, does she allow herself to believe in that possibility? Or has the waiting already taught her that protecting her heart is the safer choice? Because the answer to that question will determine what happens when I reveal the truth that has been waiting at the end of this entire journey. There are moments in life when a person finally stops running from the truth that has been quietly following them for a long time. It does not arrive with dramatic music or sudden lightning. Instead, it appears in a quiet space where the mind grows still and the heart begins speaking with a clarity that cannot be ignored anymore. Tonight I reached that moment while thinking about everything that has unfolded between us. Every realization I described before this point was leading toward something deeper, something that felt almost frightening to admit. But the longer I tried to avoid it, the more obvious it became that the truth about you was never the only discovery I was meant to make during this journey. The truth I discovered about you, the one that shocked me at first, was that your heart carries a rare kind of strength and sincerity that refuses to play emotional games. You listen carefully, you speak thoughtfully, and when you care about someone you offer your presence with quiet loyalty rather than loud promises. That discovery alone would have been enough to make me admire you deeply. But the deeper truth, The one that slowly revealed itself as I examined every conversation we shared was something far more personal. The real discovery was not just about who you are. It was about who I become when I allow myself to be honest about what you mean to me. For a long time, I convinced myself that what we were building was simply a meaningful connection between two thoughtful people. I believed that describing it that way would keep everything safe and manageable. But tonight, I finally understood that this explanation was incomplete. What has been growing between us is not just conversation or curiosity. It is the early foundation of something far more powerful, something that only appears when two people meet at a moment in life where they are mature enough to recognize the value of sincerity, but still courageous enough to believe that love can happen again. When I realized that, the fear I had been carrying began to transform into something else. Instead of worrying about what might go wrong, I started thinking about what could be possible if both of us choose to nurture this connection instead of questioning it endlessly. I imagined what it would feel like to build something steady and peaceful with a woman whose emotional intelligence matches her kindness. I imagined the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the person beside you understands your strengths and your weaknesses without needing you to pretend to be someone else. And in that moment, the final truth appeared with such clarity that I could no longer pretend it was uncertain. The shocking discovery I made about you was never something negative or suspicious. The shock came from realizing that you might be exactly the kind of woman a man meets only once or twice in his entire life. The kind whose presence quietly rearranges his priorities, whose sincerity makes him question the emotional walls he built to protect himself, whose calm strength inspires him to imagine a future that feels warmer simply because she is part of it. When I admitted that truth to myself tonight, all the hesitation that had been surrounding this connection suddenly looked different. It no longer felt like wisdom. It felt like resistance to something beautiful that had already begun forming naturally between us. And the more I allowed that realization to settle into my heart, the more another understanding began to grow beside it. You were never asking for perfection. You were simply offering authenticity and hoping to receive the same in return. That understanding changed everything about how I see the path ahead of us. Because the decision we face is not about whether love is guaranteed to succeed. No love ever comes with that promise. The real decision is whether two people are brave enough to step forward together, knowing that life will always contain uncertainty. Some people spend their entire lives waiting for absolute certainty before committing to something meaningful. But the truth is that certainty rarely arrives before the decision is made. It appears afterward, built slowly through shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. Tonight, I finally understood that the connection between us deserves that kind of courage. Not reckless emotion, not unrealistic expectations, but the quiet bravery required to say that something meaningful is worth exploring fully, rather than leaving it unfinished out of fear. As I thought about you sitting somewhere in your own world, perhaps wondering what direction this journey might take, I felt a calm clarity settle over my thoughts. I realized that the most respectful thing I can offer you is honesty about what I feel and about what I hope we might build if we continue walking forward together. Not promises that everything will always be easy, but a commitment to approach whatever comes with sincerity and presence. Because the woman you are deserves that kind of truth. You deserve to know that your patience, your warmth, and your emotional courage did not go unnoticed. They created a space where another heart could slowly rediscover the possibility of love without pressure or illusion. And once that rediscovery happened, the only responsible choice was to acknowledge it openly rather than hiding behind hesitation. So here is the final clarity that emerged from everything I have been reflecting on tonight. The shocking truth I discovered about you is that you are not simply someone who entered my life unexpectedly. You are someone who awakened the part of me that still believes love can appear quietly, patiently, and transform two lives if both people choose to nurture it with honesty. And realizing that truth has changed the way I see the future, because now I understand that the opportunity standing in front of us is not something that should be ignored or delayed endlessly. The future will always contain unknowns. Distance, responsibilities, circumstances, all of those things can challenge any connection. But none of them are more powerful than two people who decide that what they are building together is worth protecting. And that is the decision I finally understand tonight. Not a decision based on fear of losing you, but a decision based on the recognition that meeting someone like you is rare enough that it deserves courage rather than hesitation. Whatever direction our story takes from here, I know one thing with absolute certainty. This journey of reflection has revealed the value of sincerity in a way I will never forget. It reminded me that love does not always arrive loudly or dramatically. Sometimes it appears quietly in conversations, in shared understanding, in the gentle patience of a woman who believes that real connection grows slowly and honestly. And if that kind of love is standing at the beginning of our story, then the only meaningful choice is to step forward with the same sincerity that brought us here in the first place. Because life is too short to ignore the rare moments when two hearts recognize each other in the middle of an ordinary conversation.